November 9th, 1943. Tsugaru Strait, off the coast of Hokkaido, Japan. Lieutenant Commander Akiko Yamashita stared at the radio transmission logs spread across her desk at Otaru Naval Intelligence Center, her hands trembling as she recorded what would later be classified as the most devastating intelligence failure in Imperial Navy history. In the span of 47 minutes, 23 vessels of the combined fleet's Northern Patrol Group had vanished beneath the dark waters, not to enemy aircraft they could track on radar, not to surface warships they could engage with guns, but to phantom predators that struck from the abyss and melted back into the depths like vengeful spirits of the sea. The first transmission arrived at 03:47 hours on what had started as a routine November morning. Lieutenant Commander Yamashita, one of only 3 women serving in operational roles within the Imperial Japanese Navy's Intelligence Division, had been monitoring routine patrol communications when the radio crackled to life with a message that would haunt her for the rest of her life. Otaru Base, this is Destroyer Kaminari. We are under attack. Repeat, we are under attack by unknown submarines. The voice of Captain Tadashi Kobayashi, a veteran of the China incident and the early Pacific campaigns, carried a tone of disbelief that chilled Yamashita to the bone. Then came the sound that would replay in her nightmares for decades. The thunderous roar of bulkheads collapsing, the screaming of twisted metal, and finally, silence. Within 17 minutes, the communications board at Otaru Naval Center had become a symphony of terror. The heavy cruiser Mikawa reported torpedo strikes along her port side. The destroyer Raiden screamed about impossible underwater contacts moving at speeds exceeding 30 knots. The ammunition ship Hokkaido sent only a fragmentary transmission, multiple impacts, magazine flooding, abandoning, before her powerful radio transmitter went dead forever. Lieutenant Commander Yamashita frantically plotted each distress call on the large strategic map that dominated the intelligence center's main wall. What emerged was a pattern that defied every principle of submarine warfare she had studied at the Naval War College. The attacks weren't random hit-and-run strikes typical of American submarine operations. Instead, they formed a precise geometric pattern across 50 nautical miles of ocean, suggesting either an impossible concentration of enemy submarines or tactical coordination beyond anything the Imperial Navy had encountered. By 04:34 hours, Vice Admiral Kenji Nakamura burst through the doors of the Intelligence Center, his uniform hastily donned over his sleeping clothes. As commander of the Northern Defense Fleet, he had been awakened by his aide with news that his entire patrol group was under attack. Standing before Yamashita's plotting board, watching her mark each lost vessel with a red X, the color drained from his weathered face. "How many submarines?" he demanded, his voice barely controlled. Yamashita looked up from her calculations, her dark eyes reflecting the harsh fluorescent lights. "Sir, based on the attack pattern and timing, we estimate at least 8, possibly 12 enemy submarines operating in perfect coordination." The admiral's face went white. In the entire history of submarine warfare, no nation had ever successfully coordinated more than 3 submarines in a single attack. What they were witnessing should have been tactically impossible. As dawn broke over the Tsugaru Strait, the full magnitude of the disaster became apparent. Reconnaissance aircraft launched from Misawa Air Base returned with photographs that would become classified at the highest levels of government. Where the Northern Patrol Group should have been completing its routine transit, the ocean surface was littered with debris fields stretching for miles. The destroyer Arashi had broken in two, her bow section jutting from the water like an accusatory finger pointing toward heaven. The cruiser Sendai lay capsized, her massive hull serving as a temporary refuge for survivors who had managed to escape the freezing November waters. Oil slicks spread across the strait in rainbow patterns, marking the graves of vessels that had simply disintegrated under the coordinated torpedo attack. Lieutenant Commander Yamashita coordinated the search and rescue operations from her position at Otaru Naval Center. But the reports streaming in painted an increasingly grim picture. The destroyer Hayate had taken 4 torpedo hits in rapid succession, her entire engineering section flooding within minutes. Survivors reported that the torpedoes had struck with supernatural precision, each one finding the most vulnerable points of their vessel's armor. Captain Hiroshi Sato of the light cruiser Natori, one of the few senior officers to survive the attack, provided testimony that would fundamentally alter Japanese understanding of submarine warfare. Speaking from his hospital bed at Otaru Naval Hospital, his left arm in a sling and burns covering 30% of his body, Sato reported to Yamashita during her investigation. The first torpedo struck our forward magazine at exactly 03:51. But that wasn't the terrifying part. The terrifying part was that they knew exactly where to hit us. Every torpedo found our most vulnerable points: ammunition storage, fuel bunkers, engine rooms. It was as if they had our blueprints. But Sato's most disturbing revelation came next. We never saw a periscope, never detected a single submarine on our sonar. They appeared from nowhere, struck with perfect precision, then vanished as if they had never existed. Our depth charges found only empty water. It was like fighting ghosts. The psychological impact extended far beyond the immediate survivors. Within hours of the attack, reports began filtering in from naval bases across northern Japan. Experienced submarine hunters were refusing to take their vessels into the Tsugaru Strait. Destroyer captains who had successfully hunted American submarines in the South Pacific were now requesting transfers to land-based positions. The elite Special Attack Unit, trained specifically for anti-submarine warfare, submitted a formal request to postpone all operations pending analysis of new enemy capabilities. What made the disaster even more incomprehensible was the complete failure of Japanese intelligence to anticipate the attack. Lieutenant Commander Yamashita had been monitoring American submarine activity in the North Pacific for 8 months, and nothing in the intercepted communications had suggested a major operation in Japanese home waters. The Imperial Navy's code-breaking section, housed in a heavily fortified bunker beneath Tokyo Bay, had detected no unusual patterns in American naval communications. The sophisticated hydrophone networks strung along Japan's northern coastline had recorded no submarine movements. Even the network of fishing vessels that reported unusual sightings had noticed nothing suspicious in the weeks leading up to the attack. Captain Saburo Tanaka, chief of the Naval Intelligence Division's Enemy Submarines Section, had actually submitted a report 4 days before the attack titled "Assessment of American Submarine Capabilities in the Western Pacific Theater." The document, which Yamashita had helped prepare, concluded that American submarines lacked both the numbers and tactical sophistication to threaten major Japanese naval formations in home waters. The report's most prescient section, written by Yamashita herself, had noted increased radio traffic between American Pacific Fleet headquarters and submarine commanders, suggesting possible operational planning. However, her recommendation for increased coastal patrols had been rejected by Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto's staff as an unnecessary diversion of resources from offensive operations. Now, as Yamashita stood in the ruins of her intelligence estimates, she realized that the Americans had achieved something the Japanese had considered impossible: complete operational surprise in Japan's most heavily defended waters. The attack had been planned and executed with a level of coordination that suggested either revolutionary improvements in submarine technology or tactical innovations that the Imperial Navy had never encountered. Her investigation revealed disturbing gaps in Japanese coastal surveillance. The hydrophone station at Cape Shiraya had been offline for maintenance during the crucial 48 hours before the attack. The patrol aircraft from Misawa had been grounded by weather conditions that, according to meteorological records, should not have prevented flight operations. Even the network of coastal observation posts had reported nothing unusual during the period when 8 enemy submarines had apparently been maneuvering into attack positions. Working around the clock, Lieutenant Commander Yamashita began to piece together a tactical picture that would revolutionize Japanese understanding of submarine warfare. Using survivor testimonies, debris analysis, and careful timing of the radio transmissions, she constructed a minute-by-minute account of the attack that revealed its true sophistication. The enemy submarines had not attacked randomly. Instead, they had positioned themselves in a precise octagonal formation around the expected route of the northern patrol group. When the Japanese ships entered this invisible trap, they found themselves surrounded by coordinated attackers striking from every direction simultaneously. The destroyer Yukikaze, according to her surviving gunnery officer, had detected submarine contacts at bearings 045, 120, 200, and 315 degrees, perfectly spaced around the compass. When the ship's captain ordered evasive maneuvers, the submarine attacks adapted in real time, maintaining the encirclement even as the Japanese vessels attempted to escape. Most disturbing was the evidence of coordinated targeting. The Americans hadn't simply fired torpedoes at random targets. Instead, they had systematically prioritized their attacks. First, the escort destroyers to eliminate anti-submarine defenses, then the cruisers to neutralize heavy firepower, and finally, the support vessels to maximize overall destruction. This level of tactical coordination required communication capabilities that the Japanese believed no submarine force possessed. Yamashita's analysis revealed that the attack had been executed with mathematical precision. The spacing between submarines, the timing of torpedo launches, even the selection of targets had followed a calculated pattern designed to maximize destruction while minimizing the submarine's exposure to counterattack. The American commanders had turned submarine warfare into a science. The most shocking revelation came from technical analysis of the torpedo impacts. Japanese naval engineers examining the wreckage of the destroyer Kaminari discovered evidence that challenged fundamental assumptions about submarine capabilities. The torpedoes had left no visible wakes, making it impossible for Japanese lookouts to spot incoming attacks or take evasive action. This suggested either electric propulsion systems far more advanced than anything in the Japanese arsenal, or revolutionary improvements in torpedo design that eliminated the telltale bubble trails that had previously made submarine attacks detectable.
British. Even more disturbing was evidence of what appeared to be acoustic guidance systems. Multiple survivors reported torpedoes that seemed to follow our ship even when vessels changed course after the initial launch. If true, this represented a technological breakthrough that would make traditional anti-torpedo maneuvers useless. Commander Yoshio Nakajima, the Imperial Navy's leading torpedo expert, submitted a classified report concluding that the American attacks demonstrated technological capabilities exceeding our current understanding of submarine warfare. His analysis suggested that the enemy possessed not only advanced torpedo systems, but also underwater detection equipment capable of tracking multiple targets simultaneously. But perhaps most terrifying was the evidence of coordinated underwater communication. For the submarines to have executed such precise timing, they must have possessed the ability to communicate while submerged, a capability that Japanese submarines lacked entirely. The implications were staggering. If American submarines could coordinate attacks in real time, no Japanese naval formation would be safe anywhere in the Pacific. As Lieutenant Commander Yamashita compiled her final report on the attack, she realized that the Imperial Navy faced an enemy that had fundamentally altered the nature of naval warfare. The traditional rules of engagement, based on visible opponents and predictable tactics, no longer applied. The Americans had created a new form of warfare that struck from invisible positions with coordinated precision. The Northern Patrol Group hadn't just been defeated, it had been systematically annihilated by an enemy that seemed to possess almost supernatural capabilities. And somewhere in the depths of the Pacific, those phantom submarines were still out there, waiting for their next opportunity to strike. The phantom submarines had vanished as mysteriously as they had appeared, leaving 23 Japanese warships scattered across the bottom of the Tsugaru Strait and Lieutenant Commander Akiko Yamashita with the impossible task of understanding how 8 American submarines had achieved what should have been tactically impossible. But 6,000 miles away in Pearl Harbor, the architects of this underwater revolution were already planning their next devastating strike. This is the untold story of Operation Silent Thunder, the secret American program that turned submarine warfare into a precise science and forever changed the balance of power in the Pacific. The mathematician who changed naval warfare. 6 months before the Tsugaru Strait disaster, Dr. Catherine Kit Morrison sat in a cramped office at the Office of Naval Research in Washington, D.C., surrounded by mathematical equations that would revolutionize submarine warfare. A brilliant MIT-trained mathematician who'd been recruited into the Navy's top-secret anti-submarine warfare development program, Morrison had been tasked with solving what Admiral Ernest King called the coordination problem: how to make multiple submarines fight as a single coordinated unit. Traditional submarine warfare had always been a solitary affair. Individual submarines hunted alone, relying on stealth and surprise to attack enemy vessels before disappearing into the depths. But Morrison's mathematical models suggested something revolutionary. If submarines could be coordinated like a wolf pack, their effectiveness would increase exponentially rather than simply additively. Working 18-hour days in her windowless office, Morrison developed what she called dynamic convergence theory, a mathematical framework that treated submarine attacks not as individual events, but as components of a larger geometric system. Her breakthrough came when she realized that the ocean itself could be used as a three-dimensional chessboard, with submarines positioned at precisely calculated coordinates to create an inescapable trap for enemy surface vessels. The mathematics were staggering in their complexity. Morrison had to account for underwater currents, varying depths, torpedo travel times, enemy evasion patterns, and the acoustic signatures of different submarine classes. Her final calculations required over 200 pages of differential equations and probability matrices that could only be solved using the Navy's most advanced computing machines. But the theoretical framework was only the beginning. Morrison's real genius lay in translating mathematical theory into practical tactical doctrine. She developed a series of geometric patterns, diamond formations, hexagonal arrays, octagonal encirclements, each designed for specific types of enemy formations and sea conditions. Her convergent attack protocols provided submarine commanders with precise positioning instructions that would allow them to coordinate attacks with mathematical precision. Admiral Charles Lockwood, commander of the Pacific Fleet's submarine force, initially dismissed Morrison's theories as academic nonsense that would get good men killed. But when her mathematical models accurately predicted the failure of 3 conventional submarine attacks in the Solomon Islands, Lockwood began to pay attention. By March 1943, Morrison had been given unlimited resources and a team of 12 naval officers to develop what would become Operation Silent Thunder.
While Morrison worked on tactical theory, another revolutionary development was taking place in the laboratories of Bell Telephone Company in New Jersey. Dr. Margaret Chen, a Chinese-American electrical engineer who had fled the Japanese invasion of Manchuria, was developing what would become the key technological breakthrough that made coordinated submarine warfare possible: the ANWQC-1 underwater telephone system. Traditional submarine communication had been limited to surface radio transmissions, forcing submarines to reveal their positions whenever they needed to coordinate with other vessels. Chen's innovation used low-frequency sound waves that could travel through water over long distances, allowing submarines to communicate while remaining completely submerged. The technical challenges were immense. Underwater sound transmission had to account for temperature variations, salinity differences, and the complex acoustic properties of different ocean depths. Chen's team spent months testing different frequencies, finally settling on extremely low-frequency transmissions in the 303,000 Hz range that could penetrate the ocean's acoustic layers while remaining undetectable to Japanese hydrophone equipment. But communication was only part of the technological revolution. The submarines selected for Operation Silent Thunder were equipped with the revolutionary SJ-1 radar system, developed by the MIT Radiation Laboratory under Dr. Elena Rodriguez, a Spanish refugee physicist who had escaped fascist Spain in 1936. The SJ-1 could track multiple surface targets simultaneously while the submarine remained submerged, providing precise targeting information that eliminated the guesswork from torpedo attacks. Perhaps most crucial was the development of the Mark 18 electric torpedo by the Naval Torpedo Station in Newport, Rhode Island. Unlike conventional torpedoes that left visible wakes of compressed air bubbles, the Mark 18 used an electric motor and left no surface trail. More importantly, under the guidance of Dr. Sarah Kowalski, a Polish-American engineer whose family had been killed in the Warsaw Ghetto, the Mark 18 incorporated a primitive but effective acoustic guidance system that could home in on the sound signatures of enemy vessels. The integration of these technologies created a weapon system unlike anything the world had ever seen. Submarines could now coordinate attacks while remaining invisible, track multiple targets with unprecedented accuracy, and launch torpedoes that struck with almost supernatural precision. The Japanese Navy, still fighting with tactics and technology from the early days of the war, would be completely unprepared for what was coming. The human cost of innovation from 845 to 1230. But behind the technological marvels and mathematical theories lay human stories of sacrifice and determination that gave Operation Silent Thunder its emotional core. The 8 submarine crews selected for the mission represented the elite of the American submarine force, men who had volunteered for what everyone understood might be a suicide mission. Commander James "Thunder" Thompson of USS Barracuda had lost his brother at Pearl Harbor and volunteered for the most dangerous missions as a form of personal vengeance against the Japanese Empire. His crew of 84 men had already sunk 12 enemy vessels in previous operations, but the Tsugaru Strait mission would be their greatest challenge yet. Lieutenant Commander Maria Santos of USS Mako was only one of 3 female submarine commanders in the U.S. Navy, having fought bureaucratic battles for 2 years to earn her position. Born in the Philippines to a Filipino mother and American father, Santos had witnessed the Japanese invasion of Manila and carried with her a personal understanding of what defeat would mean for the Pacific region.
The crew of USS Hammerhead, under Commander Robert Chen, Dr. Margaret Chen's younger brother, had already survived 2 depth charge attacks and the sinking of their previous submarine. These men understood better than most the risks of underwater warfare and the thin line between victory and death that defined submarine operations. Each submarine carried not just weapons and equipment, but the hopes and fears of families back home. Petty Officer First Class Joseph Kowalski, serving aboard USS Stingray, carried letters from his wife in Chicago, who was pregnant with their first child. Sonarman First Class Antonio Rodriguez of USS Shark had enlisted after his father was killed in the Bataan Death March. The psychological pressure on these crews was immense. They were being asked to execute a completely new form of warfare, using untested coordination techniques against an enemy in his home waters. The margin for error was essentially zero. A single mistake in timing or positioning could result in submarines attacking each other or exposing the entire wolf pack to enemy counterattack. Training for Operation Silent Thunder had taken 4 months at a secret facility in the Aleutian Islands, where the 8 submarines practiced coordinated maneuvers in conditions similar to those they would face in Japanese waters. The psychological stress was so intense that 3 crew members suffered nervous breakdowns and had to be replaced. But for those who completed the training, the sense of unit cohesion was unlike anything previously achieved in submarine warfare. The final approach, 1230 to 1600. By November 5, 1943, the 8 submarines of Operation Silent Thunder had reached their staging area 200 nautical miles northeast of Hokkaido. For the first time in naval history, multiple submarines were operating as a coordinated unit in enemy waters, maintaining constant underwater communication while remaining completely invisible to Japanese detection systems.
The operation's timing was crucial. Intelligence from the code-breaking team at Station Hypo had revealed that the Japanese Northern Patrol Group would be transiting the Tsugaru Strait on the night of November 9th, following a route that would take them directly through the predetermined kill zone. The submarines had 4 days to position themselves according to Morrison's mathematical calculations while avoiding detection by Japanese coastal defenses. Commander Thompson, designated as Wolfpack leader, coordinated the positioning using Dr. Chen's underwater communication system. Each submarine took its assigned position in the octagonal formation that Morrison's calculations had identified as optimal for the expected Japanese force composition. The precision required was extraordinary. Each submarine had to maintain its position within a 500-meter radius while accounting for underwater currents and the movement patterns of Japanese patrol aircraft. The psychological tension during these final days was almost unbearable. The submarines were operating in enemy home waters, surrounded by Japanese coastal defenses, completely dependent on their ability to remain undetected. Any submarine that was discovered would not only be destroyed but would compromise the entire operation. Lieutenant Commander Santos later described the experience in her classified after-action report. "We were ghosts haunting enemy waters, completely invisible but completely vulnerable. Every sonar contact, every aircraft engine, every unusual sound could mean discovery and death. But we also knew that we were part of something that would change naval warfare forever." On the night of November 8th, the Japanese Northern Patrol Group passed directly over 3 of the American submarines without detecting them. The electric drive systems and sound-dampening modifications that had been incorporated into the Operation Silent Thunder submarines proved their worth, allowing the Wolfpack to remain hidden even under direct enemy observation. The perfect execution. At 0330 hours on November 9th, the Japanese Northern Patrol Group entered the kill zone exactly as predicted. The 23 Japanese warships, led by the heavy cruiser Mikawa, were following a standard anti-submarine formation that would have been effective against individual submarine attacks but was completely inadequate against a coordinated Wolfpack assault. Commander Thompson's tactical coordination was flawless. Using the underwater communication system, he directed the 8 submarines to begin their convergent attack at precisely 0347 hours.
The mathematical precision of Morrison's calculations was validated as torpedoes launched from different submarines arrived at their targets within seconds of each other, creating the devastating simultaneous attacks that so confused Japanese survivors. The USS Barracuda struck the destroyer Kaminari with 3 Mark 18 torpedoes, the acoustic guidance systems ensuring that each torpedo found its most vulnerable target areas. USS Mako, under Lieutenant Commander Santos's command, attacked the cruiser Mikawa with a spread of 4 torpedoes that struck with such precision that Japanese survivors believed they were under attack from multiple submarines. The coordination extended beyond just the initial attack. As Japanese ships attempted evasive maneuvers, the Wolfpack adapted in real time, maintaining their encirclement and continuing to attack from multiple directions. The destroyer Raiden, attempting to escape to the northeast, found itself under attack from USS Hammerhead. When it changed course to the southeast, USS Stingray was waiting with a perfectly positioned torpedo spread. The psychological impact on the Japanese crews was devastating. Traditional submarine attacks came from a single direction and could be evaded through standard anti-submarine maneuvers. But the Wolfpack attack created the impression of being surrounded by invisible enemies attacking from everywhere simultaneously. This psychological effect amplified the physical destruction, causing panic that prevented effective damage control and contributed to the high loss of life. Within 47 minutes, 23 Japanese warships had been sunk or damaged beyond repair. The 8 American submarines had fired a total of 96 torpedoes with a hit rate of 89%, unprecedented accuracy that vindicated both Morrison's mathematical targeting calculations and the acoustic guidance systems developed for the Mark 18 torpedoes. The escape and aftermath. As quickly as they had struck, the Wolfpack vanished. Following pre-planned escape routes calculated to minimize their exposure to Japanese counterattacks, the 8 submarines dispersed in different directions, using their superior underwater speed and stealth capabilities to evade the massive search effort that the Japanese launched in response to the attack. The Japanese response was hampered by their complete misunderstanding of what had occurred. Believing they had been attacked by a much larger submarine force, Japanese commanders deployed their anti-submarine assets across a vast area of ocean, allowing the American submarines to escape through the gaps in their search pattern. All 8 submarines returned safely to Pearl Harbor by November 20th, having achieved the most successful submarine operation in naval history. But the true significance of Operation Silent Thunder extended far beyond the immediate tactical victory. The Americans had proved that coordinated submarine warfare was not only possible, but devastatingly effective against traditional naval formations.
The communication systems pioneered by Dr. Chen evolved into the sophisticated underwater networks that connect modern submarine fleets, allowing real-time coordination across vast distances. Every submarine in the U.S. Navy today carries descendants of the technology first tested in the waters off Japan in November 1943. The human cost of the Tsugaru Strait attack, 2,847 Japanese sailors killed in 47 minutes, stands as a reminder of warfare's devastating efficiency when technology and tactics combined with mathematical precision. The phantom submarines that struck that November night proved that the most effective weapons are often those the enemy never sees coming. Lieutenant Commander Akiko Yamashita spent the remainder of the war trying to understand and counter American Wolfpack tactics. Her intelligence reports, captured after Japan's surrender, revealed the extent to which Operation Silent Thunder had shattered Japanese confidence in their naval capabilities. "We never learned to fight ghosts," she wrote in her final war diary. "They struck from the darkness and vanished like mist, leaving only death and confusion in their wake." The 8 submarines of Operation Silent Thunder had achieved something unprecedented in naval history. They had turned mathematics into a weapon, coordination into conquest, and invisible attackers into an unstoppable force.
In 47 minutes of perfectly executed violence, they had demonstrated that the future of warfare belonged to those who could combine human courage with technological innovation and scientific precision. The Phantom Fleet had vanished back into the depths, but their legacy would echo through the corridors of naval power for generations to come. In the dark waters of the Tsugaru Strait, the age of coordinated submarine warfare had been born in blood, mathematics, and silence of the abyss.